Hey, this is Joel. Welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a little episode of Critiquing Creationism. The article we're going to take a look at today comes via the Answers in Genesis website. All right, Young Earth Creationist Apologetics Ministry of Ken Ham. So yes, right on the front page of Answers in Genesis, the Apologetics Ministry of Ken Ham for Young Earth Creationism, is this question. Were horses designed to be ridden? Yes, were horses made for human beings to sit on them? Right? That's our deep question of the day. And it's associated with an article in their Answers Research Journal, no less, which is their peer-reviewed scientific journal. And spoiler alert, it's not very scientific. This is possibly one of the least scientific papers I've ever seen published in this journal. And I found it somewhat amusing. I hope you do too. You know, I don't usually like to make fun of Young Earth Creationists. We try to keep it light, but respectful. I'm going to be laying it on a little thick with this article because it's a little on the just very, very, I'll say, light side, both scientifically and theologically. We'll try to at least extract something just a little bit deeper than what I think the original author was thinking. Okay, let's just get right to this extremely short scientific publication from Answers in Genesis. As of the recording of this episode, this is what appears on the front page of Answers in Genesis. Were horses designed to be ridden? You might be surprised to find out that this is a question that has been overlooked until recent years. I guess I was a little bit surprised too. Our author is Caleb Harrier, who is introduced to us as an independent scholar. I looked him up, and he is a horse enthusiast. He's published one other short little blurb about horses on there just as a little blog post, but this comes to us as a research article. And where is this research article published? It's published in what's called the Answers Research Journal. And you'll see the byline here, Cutting Edge Creation Research. But keep that in mind as we go look at this paper here. This is cutting edge stuff. And yes, I am laying it on thick today. I am being sarcastic. This is not cutting edge creation research. And many of my creation scientist friends would recognize it as such. This is extremely light material to have been published in their research journal. I really think it devalues their research journal. Here are some of their recent publications. All right, so this would be the very latest. Today, January 29th. Last week, it was a sixth part of a series on the chronological framework of ancient history, which is a long, detailed examination of mostly Egyptian history, trying to compress Egyptian history into a 4,500 year chronology, right? I mean, that's one of the ongoing problems in Young Earth Creationism is how to squish all of human history into a shorter time frame than is typically thought. And then a very intriguing article, Ark and Back, again, using the marsupial fossil record. That is actually a really interesting article with lots of data in it and poses some very fascinating challenges to Young Earth Creationism. So there is a article written by a Young Earth Creationist who is providing data which challenges one of the typical assumptions of Young Earth Creationism. So that would be a fair use of a research journal in which you're bringing data to bear on a hypothesis that Young Earth Creationists have developed and casting some doubt on that for the purpose of trying to, make the hypothesis better or have people reassess their hypotheses and come up with better ideas. Right? That is how science actually works. And so in some sense, it is working here in this particular journal with some articles. But that is not what we have in store right now with Were Horses Designed to be Ridden? So here it is. Here's the article. Again, Answers Research Journal. There's the address of it. I need to say that because of the copyright issues involved in this particular journal. I'm just showing you pieces of this article and sharing them for what I call educational purposes here on critiquing creationism. I'm not gonna read you every word. We're just gonna go through a few things here. Horses have served as one of man's closest companions for thousands of years. Humans have ridden them into battles, attached them to the plow, galloped them across great plains, shown them to countless competitions, right? We've made great use of horses. So one might even wonder how easily man would have managed to advance without them. Could we be where we're at without horses? With such close ties to human history, it seems natural that one would ask if horses were designed for riding. Such is the topic of this article and the research thereof. In considering different subjects as history, anatomy, and scripture, it is the author's belief that horses were designed to be ridden. Okay, so there's his thesis right there. Horses were designed to be ridden. Now, I can give you this article in a nutshell, and that is this. He provides a few biblical references, which there's many places where the Bible refers to, armies using horses. Actually, the Israelites weren't supposed to use horse and chariots. That's one of the commands of God to the Israelites, and which they constantly disobey. So not like their neighbors, which are using horses for battle. And horses are used in many other contexts, and Christ comes into the Jerusalem on a donkey, right? And so if we expand the definition of horse to include asses, horses, donkeys, and then eventually zebras, right? All the horse kind, and all of them could be ridden to some extent. And so that's one of the questions I have about this article. He doesn't really talk about other horses or the horse kind. He just kind of is thinking of domesticated horses, which is one of the pitfalls of this article. But we'll get to that. But this is the central thing. This is the central question in the paper. So it's the thing we need to focus on. And it's the question of design. What exactly is design, and how would you recognize design in nature? It is the author's belief that the primary reason as to why the topic has received so little attention is mostly due to the implications of design. Obviously, he's actually stating in his article, okay, without any support for this, all right? There's no references for this. Oh, by the way, there's no references to any scientific journal, like peer-reviewed published articles he doesn't use any peer-reviewed papers himself, right? No peer-reviewed data is utilized in this particular paper or referenced in this particular paper. They're all popular articles that he's referencing. That alone kind of sticks out as like, okay, this is cutting edge research into creation science, and we can't even reference any other research articles in this particular research. So, back to this point. So he's trying to say that, well, you know why no one's really talked about whether horses were designed for man to ride on them? Like, that's one of the purposes of horses, is to carry humans around. One of the reasons why no one's done that is because it has implications of that design. See, if people were to admit that horses were made to carry human beings, like, if there's some physical features of the horse that seem to suggest that they were designed specifically for the human body, the human rear end to sit on and to be able to carry that weight and to provide the handholds. I'm being a little dramatic. The handholds, right, for how you would hold on to the horse, right? All of those are there for this, specifically designed for human beings to climb on a horse and to ride it around. All right. And because that's self-evident, this would be an obvious proof that God is the designer, or there is a designer, which of course he believes is the Yahweh, the God of the Bible. And so he said, like, well, this is why, you secular scientists don't really think about whether horses were designed to carry humans, because you'd come to the conclusion that they are, which would then drive you to believing in God. And so therefore you ignore this very important question, right? If horses were designed for a very specific purpose, this would suggest the existence of a designer along with accountability to that designer. This is classic stuff. You're not, because you turn a blind eye to design in nature because you're unwilling to accept the fact that there's a designer. Such an idea runs contrary to evolutionary teaching. Could a supreme being have created a certain kind of animal to carry humans? Did our Creator design animals to benefit man in various ways? So, all right, so I'll just go through some of the other things he says in the article. This is a total of like 3.5 written pages this article is, compared to like an Andrew Snelling article, which is like 65 to 80 pages in this particular journal. All right. So over wordy, this one really is devoid of much information. I started out by saying he shows various biblical references showing that people rode horses and they have various uses to people. Then you can point to the obvious scriptures that, that God created the world, and, that Adam was given dominion. And we could argue about the definition of dominion there, but at least the use of things in this world, or the responsibility for caring for that world. But he does two things to build his case in the 3.5 pages of text that is this entire research article. Right? Those two things are establish that human beings have ridden horses for a long period of time, all right, since the beginning of domestication, which is, 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, although in the young Earth creationist timeline, 4,500 years ago at most. And then establish that horses are able to carry humans, and that they're not being hurt by that. Right? There are some claims that, like, some people might say that horses weren't designed for it, and try to argue that by riding a horse you're hurting the horse. All right, I'm sure that's the case if you're 450-pound human and you're on a donkey. Right? That is obviously not. That's not good design or a good match, right? But maybe horses are plenty strong and it doesn't really hurt them. And again, referencing popular articles that horses aren't necessarily hurt by this activity unless it's overdone, which is part of stewardship of God's creation. It's not like, misusing the things God has given us. But see, you would say that because the Bible clearly shows that humans were using horses and God is allowing them to use horses for a variety of different purposes, then as long as they're not overdoing it, right, they're applying good stewardship and they're allowed to use that particular resource in nature. And God must have given them that particular resource. And so by establishing that it's not really hurting horses if done in moderation, and that God allows it, and then lastly, showing that horses would be at the end times. As already said, Scripture does not provide a specific verse which states that God specifically designed horses to be ridden. That's absolutely true, right? There's no like Genesis 17:24, and God created horses to be ridden by human beings. But he's inferring, right, from other passages. This then begs the question: can it even be proven? It is the position of this author that it can be proven scripturally in view of what's written in the last book of the Bible. Revelation describes the glorious return of the King. Then I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and is in righteousness. He judges and makes war. So far, it goes on. Now, some people would dispute that the white horse is a physical white horse, that this is this revelation is a vision of John, and these things represent a lot of other things. But either way, horse or not, he's basically trying to make the argument that because in the end times, right, in heaven, horses are there, and there's man, or in this case, the glorious King, Christ, riding that horse. So it can't be bad. In fact, here is God as a symbol riding the horse, so that the horse was clearly made, in this case, for God to ride upon that horse, the King to ride on that horse. So how can you possibly say that God didn't design, that horse for man to sit on it? Then getting to the end of the article, before I then take off on my riff about design and give my own perspective here. Let's see. Here's my last two little bits. Right, this is just one page later. Scripture is the final authority on all matters in life, including the benefits of horses' rideability. This is just stock stuff from creationist literature, right? These are just things you have to say, or now I guess you just use the the Answers in Genesis AI engine, which knows all Answers in Genesis material, to write this article. This article could have been written by AI within minutes. Just extracting common stuff from the AIG literature. So An aspect of the king's return is that he, along with his heavenly armies, will be riding on horses. That's the imagery in Revelation. Again, God's riding horses and his armies are riding horses. I guess the angels are riding horses. And therefore, this was part of the original design of the world, that God made horses to be ridden. This event will take place in fulfillment of prophecy. The horse was indeed then designed to carry a rider. Last thing, I had to kind of laugh at this point. Now, I don't want to make fun of our author here. I'm sure he loves horses and he was really excited about writing this article. I'm sure he spent time working on this and was thrilled to be able to get it published at Answers in Genesis. Like I said, he's written one little bloggy blurb for Answers in Genesis a couple of years ago, and now here is this first research article, which he could use if you were a professor at a small Christian college, and you published an Answers research journal. That would count as a publication for, say, your tenure requirements, or unlikely tenure anymore at those institutions, but your requirements for maintaining your position, over getting another contract, right? So I'm just giving you the idea. That's the weight of these articles. I mean, Answers in Genesis has created this journal, essentially is one of the really only 3 or 4 journals within the creationist realm in which you can publish articles that are considered scholarly, and that they would be accepted by academics, academics at certain Christian colleges, as legitimate scholarly activity. And so with that in mind, right, let's read the acknowledgments. I want to thank Matt Dawson for his faithful encouragement in my journey writing this paper. Often I was reminded that it takes time to accomplish great projects. Again, 5-page article. Look at the references over here. Great American Adventures, the Horse Conformation Handbook, Horse in the Ancient World. Well, that's a book there. Do Horses Like to Be Ridden? All about horses. Equine Science, a little more of a textbooky type thing, but still not in a peer-reviewed journal with data. Equine Wellness, so forth. All right, bunch of magazines. Right. And just a several-page article. But this took time to accomplish this great project. I would say, the yesterday afternoon? That's kind of what it feels like to me. Now, all humor aside, okay, this is just a regular standard sort of look at something that's in God's creation, and say that, look at all these amazing features. God did it, right? God designed that. God made it, right? And I think that any Christian could say that. Any theist can say that, who believes that the world's origins and the things in it are created by something above, right? The natural order, right? There's something supernatural about it. And so just using that word design and saying it was made for that. I mean, you could say that everything was made, all right, in God's good pleasure. You might want to ask then, were specific things made for human beings, and maybe some other things aren't made for humans? Some star on the other side of the universe wasn't necessarily made for us. They were made for God's good pleasure and for his glory. And there might be objects and things on earth that we use, the fruit from the tree, right, in the garden. It was specifically, it's a good thing for Adam to eat. Now, here's hopefully my quick assessment. Well, the paper, I think it's structured to provide some theological justification for horse riding, right? That is not a bad thing that humans ride horses. That is something that God created this creature, and it has features such that it can handle the load of a human being, and therefore we're not wrong to be able to utilize that resource, part of God's creation, part of the world. But at the same time, it makes several questionable leaps in logic, particularly its treatment of biological design, human dominion, and even exegesis. So let's start first with the design argument. Yeah, let's start with that design argument, right? The paper's central claim is that horses were specifically designed for the purpose of riding, right? Not that they happen to be able to be used for riding and being given the creativity to explore the resources of the world. We find like, hey, I'm going to utilize that. But it was specifically designed with humans riding it in mind, right? I think that raises several questions, both scientific and theological. First of all, I think it's a misunderstanding of biological function versus design, right? It's important to think about function. The author of this particular paper, he equates functionality with design intent, but that's a flawed assumption. Many organisms exhibit traits that allow them to be used in many ways that aren't necessarily the result of direct design. In other words, the purpose of those features weren't necessarily for this particular thing that we're, for example, the human hand is remarkably dexterous, allows for a variety of functions, right? I can write with it, I can play instruments, I can use tools, right? I can wave with my hands, I can grasp things, and I can punch you, all right? So, but that doesn't mean it was specifically designed, right? That doesn't mean that the hand was designed for any specific one of these tasks, right? It meets a particular need, right? Maybe grabbing food, climbing trees. And then later on, when there's other things available in the environment, it's suddenly, all of a sudden, it's like, hey, this thing's kind of handy, haha, right? I can use it to do these other things too. Does that mean I then automatically look at this and say like, this hand was created to type? Because I can think of, we created keyboards in order to match, our fingers and our dexterity and so forth. So was it created to type? Not necessarily. Created with dexterity, and then we find ways to use that for other things. So I think it's like that's the function. Function and design aren't necessarily tied together directly all the time. So for example, horses have really strong backs, because we're talking about horses here, right? And they have strong backs. They have muscular features that allow them to bear a lot of weight. That doesn't necessarily mean they were created to carry humans. Like that was the weight they're meant to bear, they're meant to carry. I mean, other animals carry a lot of weight, but they aren't necessarily explicitly designed for that purpose. After all, humans, do ride on other organisms too, right? Elephants and camels, not necessarily oxen, and probably not, as in this picture here, probably not on a stegosaurus, right? Because it'd be a little hard to sit on there. But maybe they are designed to have humans ride around on, right? I mean, even the stegosaurus, you could build a little platform up there, and they're probably strong enough to carry humans. So maybe their design is made exactly that way in order to put certain sticks in a slot. Maybe there's some kind of tree that has a particular branch shape that fits right in the slots of that stegosaurus. And so you just shove them in there, and then you can get up on there and you can hold on, right? And that's a form of transportation. And that's why the stegosaurus fans were designed that way, right? They weren't for, heating and cooling, which is one of the hypotheses for those things, right? That they're trying to get rid of heat, radiate heat, out of them. No, that's not what they're for. They're for actually carrying human beings, right? Now, maybe for all the times in which they never saw humans or weren't around humans, they have like another function that is like, fortunately, they can also do that. Oh, see now what we're doing? So like many features can have many different functions. The question is, what were they originally designed to do? And then which others are exaptations? Oh, there's a fancy word. This comes out of evolutionary biology, right? Actually, Stephen Jay Gould in particular started using this particular term, exaptation versus adaptation, right? And adaptation is the environment's challenging me, like, hey, it's really hot and I want to get rid of heat. So I'm going to take my skin and fold it up, right? Produce these structural, actually, it's an extension of the bones of the vertebra. And then you cover those bones with skin, and then you run your capillaries through there, and you can radiate heat from that, right? That would be, and we could call that an adaptation to that particular environment. But then people climbing on board in a certain way and holding on to those things probably wasn't why those organisms had those things, right? The original purpose, if I could use that word, we'll say the original function, right? For heat radiation. Again, that's a hypothesis or a theory, but let's just say that that's a good one. The other one, the second one, is an exaptation. It's a process in which a trait that originally involved for one function is co-opted for a different function. Right? The horse's shape and abilities and muscle structure, none of those muscles are there specifically to carry a human being. They have a function and a purpose for the horse's life, because there are many horses that never have had humans riding on them, right? And so they need that particular muscle shape and size in order to be able to survive in their particular environment. So that already exists. That's its original function, right? That's how it's best fit for its environment. And then you have, oh, well, human beings can climb on board. Well, that's kind of an exaptation, right? Unlike an adaptation where natural selection directly favors that trait for its current role, right? It's like our stegosaurus there. An exaptation describes cases where an existing structure or a feature acquires a new use, often through secondary modification, right? Sometimes the second use will then modify that somewhat. And so that's how you can end up with other elaborate traits in organisms. Some of the really crazy features of some organisms are really have an original function and then they're adapted on top of that for other things, or exapted. Oh, yeah, the reason I'm showing these images right here, these are from Ken Ham's Dinosaurs in Eden book, is to show you that Ken Ham and other creationists visualize dinosaurs as also being apparently designed to be ridden, right? Since, here they're strong enough to put all kinds of stuff on, right? And there's other beasts of burden in this particular picture as well, right? Oh, there's a horse there too, right? So it's not just horses that God gave us to ride, but for some reason, God took away all the dinosaurs, which were designed for us to ride and help carry stuff around for us, and eliminated all those after the flood. And this is from a talk I went to by Brian Osborne, who's a speaker for Answers in Genesis. And in that presentation, of course, he's talking about dinosaurs, but you can see there's a woman there riding, a triceratops. But let's get back to our other issues with this thing design. I think a more nuanced approach would consider that humans have historically adapted animals for various uses rather than just assuming that they're predetermined divine purpose for those adaptations. Now, in a full sovereignty view of the history of the world, right, a full theistic, God is in control of everything and everything is playing out his purposes, right? He works everything out. You can say that everything is design, right? That was the design. But that kind of is like, I can say like God did it, right? That's like a 4-year-old asking like, well, why is the sky blue? And you say, well, God made it blue, right? It's designed that way. And not going any further and asking any additional questions about why it's blue, what makes it blue, and so forth. All right. It's kind of like just this answer that just kind of covers everything and doesn't really give you any substance other than an acknowledgement of the original creator. Harrier asserts that horses were designed for riding. Then he implies a designer to whom humans owe accountability, because I can see that horses were designed to be ridden. And again, I don't think he's really proven by just looking at a horse that you can tell that was designed for human beings. Because again, I go back to my stegosaurus. I look at it as like, was that designed for human beings to ride, or do human beings literally just sort of like figure out how to ride them? Assuming in a young Earth creationist timeline, right? Are they just clever and crafty, and God designed us clever and crafty? There's the design. In order to make use of the things of the world, and we figured out a way to ride that animal. Not that the original intent was you're going to ride that particular animal. All right. So, there's an attempt to use the horse's anatomy as a proof of divine intentionality. But again, this word design becomes so watered down because you can kind of say, you can look at everything in the world and say like, Oh, it's obviously design. It is like, okay, all right, it's all design. And I could ascribe to that position myself, right? I'm a Christian, I'm a theist, I believe God made the world. Um, that's like an overall big picture assessment of everything in the world that God made it, but it doesn't inform us anything more than that. And so, and I wouldn't expect to be able to convince anybody else that God exists simply because I can point at anything and say, like, God did it. You know, we could apply this to a whole bunch of other organisms. You just pick out whatever organism you want and just apply the same kind of questions, right? Were dogs designed, right? Were wolves designed to become domesticated as pets, right? But foxes weren't. Oh, but wait a second. Some people have said that foxes actually can be or semi-domesticated, or maybe they could if we really tried hard. All right. Maybe any animal could be domesticated if we really tried hard. Does that mean we're not doing what God does, would have us do, right? Because after all, if God had designed Tasmanian devils to be pets, and we're not doing that, and we're not helping the design process and pulling that design out, then are we disobeying God? Are we not bringing His creation into its fullest being by not domesticating Tasmanian devils? And how do you know which organisms are designed to be domesticated and which ones aren't? Just because you can versus you can't? How do you know you can't? I mean, maybe you just need to try harder. I don't know, I'm going down a lot of tangents, but I mean, these are the kinds of questions that are raised out of a very simple 4-page article. So were wolves designed to become domesticated as pets? Were cows designed to be milked? Right? Were pigs designed to be eaten? People do eat different things in different parts of the world. Some people don't want to eat things or eat in other parts of the world, think it's completely wrong. What if I said we're domesticated dogs designed to be eaten by humans? How would you feel about that? Because some people might feel they are. Hey, that's a food source. That's protein. They were designed to be very, compliant. We could domesticate them, and then it makes it a whole lot easier to turn them into meat. Right. So it's I'm not advocating for that, by the way. So don't, if YouTube is screening this and somehow comes up with like, Humane Society after me or something like that. No, I'm just being provocative about like, well, how do you know what design is? How do you know that the end product or something you're seeing, that is the thing that is designed for? Like, that is the design. The other thing it does is if you start to claim divine intent behind each human's use of animals, it just kind of starts to reduce God's creative acts down to human utility. Why did God make this? Oh, because it's for man, right? This is what man's doing with that. That was made for man, right? Was the entire world made for man? No. See, God says that everything was good. I was like, very good. Not perfect, not the word perfect in Hebrew, but very good at the end of his creative events, right? Creative actions. And that seems to indicate it's very good for, humans being able to thrive in that particular environment. It doesn't mean very good in the sense of like everything was made for man. Everything about the entire creation had man in mind. You see, there's plenty of Christians, including myself, who believe in divine creation, right? But we're skeptical of narrow teleological interpretations, right? That say that this horse's anatomy, if I examine this horse's anatomy and its physical structure, its muscle structure, right, I can prove God's existence. Yeah, so I guess at the end of the day, I think he's confusing functionality with divine intention. I think he assumes human use of animals equates to divine purpose. I think he misrepresents some biblical texts, especially Revelation 19, as a specific proof, because he actually uses that as a proof, right? He uses the word proof in that context. So that's proof of specific design. I think a more robust Christian approach would acknowledge that while humans can and have used horses for riding, that doesn't necessitate a special divine design for that purpose. Now, I shouldn't have saved the best thing for last. I tend to do this. It's a problem in these videos. right? You really need to bring out the big guns at the beginning and maybe save a few good points for later. But unfortunately, sometimes I think of the best points at the end after I've kind of warmed up. There's one glaring omission from this paper that I think creates a real problem, but it also highlights something I've been talking about lately, which is divine action. How does God change things over time? How does he work in creation and bring his intended purposes to bear? Right. What I mean by that is here's where I'm going with this. Here's Harrier, the author here, and he clears a young earth creationist. So he believes that there was a horse kind, right? A type of horse that that God created, and that there was a couple horses on the ark, right, that were preserved. And then after the ark, if we look at the fossil record of horses, we see that there's like 100 or more different equine type things, right? The horse family. And among those, we have 3-toed horses, 2-toed horses, all the 1-toed horses. You've got your living horses, you got your donkeys, you got your zebras, you have your mules. Well, that's actually a hybrid. You've got your asses, you've got all your horses, right? And so all of them can be ridden to some extent, but I don't think that any of you probably think that all of them are equally capable of carrying a human being. And so does it mean that God designed horses to carry humans, but only certain of them are good at carrying humans? Or they've lost the ability to carry humans? But here's the bigger problem. The 2 horses on the ark weren't necessarily nearly as big as the ones today. Now, creationists are, they disagree on this, right? Because for a long time, they've been saying the horse series doesn't exist. The idea that horses started as little small quadrupeds and gradually grew in size over time. And they originally had 3 toes and they fused together to have 1 toe. And there's a whole bunch of other features that have changed in horses through the fossil record. So if you look at the fossil record, you'll see that, there's a kind of a progression to today's living species. And they'll deny that horses came from a non-horse, ancestor. But the question is, what were the ark horses like? And it answers in Genesis, the ark horse is a somewhat more diminutive horse than like these large horses we have today. And some creationists do see the ark, the series of like simple, smaller animals kind of growing and diversifying over time. That's sort of the young earth creationist, speciation model to become these other horses we have today, which means if this author thinks that God designed horses to hold humans, but the original horses that were on the ark or brought on the ark and the first horses that got off the ark were probably smaller and not really as capable of actually carrying a human being, then it's like they've grown into it. Oh, that's kind of like that adaptation thing, isn't it? It's kind of like, okay, they got bigger and bigger in size for other reasons because they have food resources and they're eating different kinds of grains and they have to protect themselves from predators. So one way is to get bigger and stronger and be able to run faster, right? And so those are the selective environment, which young earth creationists believe there was a selective environment that used natural selection to maybe cause horses to have 1 toe and be much faster than they were in the past and get away from the saber-toothed tigers and stuff like that. So if that's the case, then the original horses weren't designed to carry human beings. Or you have to say like, well, God saw down into the future and he knew that he was eventually out of these other horse genomics on the ark, eventually there would be a thing that would be strong enough, big enough that would be really useful to human beings. Before it was like, yeah, you could stick your kid up there or whatever, but you're not going to have them hauling around, 300 pounds of stuff. Right? We kind of had to wait till the horses evolved more, which then just suggests it's a characteristic which then developed, and then humans are like, hey, there's this larger organism I can do something with. That's an adaptation then, with respect to that characteristic for the horse. And that's what I mean about this. When you start thinking about divine intent, it's so simple to write these very simple stories for answers in Genesis. It's just like, oh, God designed horses to carry human beings, right? Did he also design, dinosaurs to carry humans and all these other organisms, but some weren't designed that way. And then if you look at the ark, you find out, lots of these animals clearly weren't able to do the things that we're ascribing to them now as being designed for. So somehow you have to start arguing that God designed these features inside these organisms, but they weren't expressed yet. Like those features were hidden and eventually come out of those organisms later, thousands of years later. Which kind of begs the question, like, what might these animals have in them? Horses and donkeys and giraffes and elephants and so forth. What could be inside their genomes now that is actually a design for a future use? Something they can't do today, but when they turn on those genes, they turn on those programs or remix their programs, they're going to have new features that allow them to do something they can't do today. And then in the future, us will look at them and go like, that animal was designed to do this. Because that's kind of what this author's saying. Maybe the original created horse didn't carry humans around, but the current one does, but now we're looking at it and we're going to say, oh, well, God, that was his intent all along. It just took a while for us to see that was his intent, like to create the animal into the condition in which it could actually do it. So I don't know. Maybe horses are designed in the future to live on Mars under extremely low oxygen conditions. Right? So when we take them there 5,000 years from now, they'll be just perfectly fine. And young earth creationists at that time will say, look, God made horses to live on Mars. That's what he did. He design horses to live on Mars, which helps us, right? Because they can help us because we'll be on Mars too. And you see, when you start thinking about that way, that's what I'm saying. You can turn anything into design if you just work hard enough, on your thesis. Okay, well, that was a fun article. Were horses designed to be ridden? I don't get it. This article only deserved to just be a blog post on the Answers in Genesis website. I think it's really pretty sad that they had to include it in the Answers Research Journal, a peer-reviewed journal. I mean, what did the reviewers say when they got this article? They should have written back and said, like, we need to hold the standards a little higher in terms of cutting edge creation science. We got to have these standards a little higher. It kind of makes me think they're running out of content, right? If they have to publish this stuff. All right. Hey, that's it for critiquing creationism today. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.